This video is brought to you by heights. I'm terrified of them. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Mr. H on YouTube. Today we will be talking about the Antebellum Period. This will be an overview of what that word means and what was the relationship between the different sections of the United States in the lead up to the Civil War. To start off, let's talk about what the word antebellum means. Antebellum means the period of time from the end of the era of good feeling all the way to the Civil War. So we're talking about a period from about 1820 all the way up to 1861. As we look through the antebellum period, this period is marked as of a continuing divide between the North and the South, especially over the issue of slavery. There are several people who will argue about different aspects of what started the Civil War in the United States, but slavery is a key component in several aspects of life that led to the eventual war between the northern and southern states. As we go through this, we'll look at how each side developed and eventually led to conflict. But first, let's talk about what was going on in the country as a whole. After the American Revolution and the War of 1812, the United States was looking to expand. They moved beyond the Mississippi River after the Louisiana Purchase, and the idea of American exceptionalism was born, an idea that Americans had a right to settle lands. This manifest destiny led them to expand throughout several different states. But as they expanded, a large question was given to them. What would happen to the states that they made? What side would they fall on? Because the big dividing block in the United States at this time was, are you a free state or are you a slave state? As the United States expanded, that question would become more and more prevalent. But for those of the established states already, the United States was quickly developing into two separate camps. Let's start with the North. The northern cities had never really relied on slave labor. Their labor was more attuned to industry and factory work and small farmlands. The majority of Americans in both regions were farmers, but in the north you would see really small, more family-oriented farms, not the large plantations that we'll talk about in just a few moments. Another big aspect of the North that you would see was the aspect of industry and factory work. A lot of Northerners, especially sons and daughters, would move to cities and look for work. The way agriculture worked back then was that the oldest son would inherit the father's farm. But if you were a second or third son or down the line, you would need to find a new area to begin your work. Since most of the North had already been settled into farmland and plots, this would mean that there really wasn't much space for you to find farming. So you would go into the city and find jobs on the factory, on the docks, anywhere that could provide a livable wage for you. The North also became much more populated. The North was usually the main center of immigration from areas like Germany and Ireland and other areas of the world. During this time period, what it meant to be an American changed, as many new ethnic groups that had not settled the United States before began to settle en masse in several different areas. By the time of the Civil War, the northern states were a melting pot of different ethnicities, languages, and backgrounds. When we think about the North in the antebellum, we think of industrial and we think of heavily populated. This is contrasted with the South. The South was very rural. And it's important for us to understand that. Now, let's talk about the relationship of most Southerners to slaves. Most Southerners really would never own a slave. Slaves were expensive, and the average Southerner farmer could not afford a slave. There would be some who were well off who could possibly rent slaves for the harvest, but the majority would never really interact with a slave as a source of labor. This did not mean, however, that they were idle. The slaves would mostly work on large plantations, especially in South Carolina, Georgia. These were cotton farms, these were sugar and tobacco plantations. These areas provided large cash crops for those plantation farmers. However, there were other farmers in the South who would work on family farms as well. You did not see the same amount of industry in the South. There were a few hot spots of urbanization, such as Atlanta and New Orleans, but for the most part, the South was agricultural and rural. The South was also not as diverse, though it did have the larger population of African Americans. The majority of the Southern ethnicity outside of the border states, the South would, for the most part, remain ethnically homogenous. And this also became a big sticking point before the Civil War. As the North became more diverse and changed, the South would look at the North and see themselves as the true America, the original America. Now, whether they were or were they not is a matter of opinion, but it is important for us to understand the differences that go through there. When we talk about the Antebellum period, we'll talk about different peoples and events that changed the relationship. But we have to look at the Civil War as, number one, an inevitable occurrence, that it was bound to happen. But also, we have to look at it as an event that took shape over several decades. The Civil War was an inevitable event, but it did not happen overnight, and the Antebellum period is often seen as the buildup. What do you think? Comment below with any questions that you might have. Give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to Mr. H on YouTube. Have a good day.